Welcome, and thank you for joining Neybor Consulting today. I'm walking you through FAR Part 13, the section of the Federal Acquisition Regulation that governs Simplified Acquisition Procedures, or SAP. If your business sells to the federal government and you don't yet have a $1 million contract vehicle, this is the part of the FAR you live in. Most federal buys actually happen here, under the Simplified Acquisition Threshold or in the Streamlined Commercial Item lane in Subpart 13.5. Over the next 24 slides, we'll define every key term, walk through every subpart, look at the dollar thresholds, the methods a contracting officer can use, the required clauses, and we'll close with 2 real-world worked examples and a list of the pitfalls we see most often. Let's begin. Here's our agenda. We start with foundations, what FAR Part 13 actually is, the underlying policy, and why every contracting officer reaches for it first. Then we lock down the definitions and the $3 thresholds that drive every decision in this part of the FAR. After that, we walk through all 5 subparts, from the procedures in 13.1 through the simplified procedures for certain commercial items in 13.5. Next, we'll dive into the 4 simplified acquisition methods themselves: the purchase card, purchase orders, BPAs, and the SF-44. Then we'll cover the competition, evaluation, and small business rules under SAP. And we'll finish with 2 end-to-end worked examples and a summary of the pitfalls we see most often. Let's start with foundations. Section 1, Foundations and Policy. Before we touch a single threshold or contract method, we have to anchor on what FAR Part 13 is and why it exists. Subpart 13.0 contains the scope, the definitions, and the policy statement at 13.003, the rule that tells contracting officers to use simplified procedures to the maximum extent practicable. Once you understand that policy, every later subpart makes sense as a tool to carry it out. So what is FAR Part 13? In plain English, it is the streamlined buying chapter of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It tells federal contracting officers how to buy supplies and services that fall under the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, and, through subpart 13.5, how to buy certain commercial items even above that threshold. The regulation has one overriding purpose: cut administrative cost, improve opportunities for small business, and put dollars on contract quickly without running a full Part 14 sealed bid or Part 15 negotiation. Look at the 4 tiles on the right. First, it is faster, days instead of months. Second, it is lower cost, less paperwork per dollar obligated. Third, it is small business friendly, because every buy above the micro-purchase threshold but at or below the simplified acquisition threshold is reserved for small business. And fourth, it has broad reach, supplies, services, even research and development and construction, all the way up to the cap. If you understand FAR Part 13, you understand the lane the federal government most wants to buy in. Why does this matter for your business? Look at the numbers on the left. Roughly 70% or more of federal contract actions, the actual number of awards, not the dollars, happen under the simplified acquisition threshold. That threshold sits at $250,000. The micro-purchase threshold, where a contracting officer can buy on a credit card with almost no formality, sits at $10,000. The donut on the right shows the distribution of contract actions by lane. More than half of every federal buy is a micro-purchase. Roughly 30% more is an SAP buy between $10,000 and the simplified acquisition threshold. Subpart 13.5, commercial items between the SAT and $9 million, covers another sliver, and only a small share of actions actually ride the heavyweight Part 14 and 15 procedures. Translation for a small business. If you are not visible in the SAP lane, you are missing the majority of federal buying activity. Now to the policy itself. FAR 13.003 is a 1-page section, but it is the gravitational center of this part. Read the quote on screen. Agencies shall use simplified acquisition procedures to the maximum extent practicable for all purchases not exceeding the simplified acquisition threshold. That word "shall" is doing a lot of work. It is not optional. The contracting officer is required to ask first, can I do this as a simplified acquisition, before reaching for any other vehicle? 3 pillars flow from that policy. First, mandatory use. SAP must be used to the maximum extent practicable below the SAT, including in the micro-purchase tier. Second, the small business reserve. Buys above the micro-purchase threshold but at or below the SAT are reserved for small business. The contracting officer can only step outside that reserve if there is no reasonable expectation of getting 2 competitive small business offers at fair market prices. Third, card first, electronic first. The same section directs agencies to use the government-wide commercial purchase card and electronic commerce to the maximum extent practicable. If you are a small business with a clean SAM registration and an e-commerce friendly catalog, you are aligned with all three pillars. Section 2, Definitions and Thresholds. Almost every dispute or compliance issue I see in the simplified acquisition lane comes back to one of three numbers. If you remember nothing else from today, remember the three thresholds we are about to cover. They tell you which method the contracting officer will use, which clauses go in your contract, and what kind of competition the regulation requires. 6 terms to lock in. Simplified Acquisition Procedures, SAP, is the umbrella term for the methods in Subpart 13.3 and the special procedures in Subpart 13.5. The Simplified Acquisition Threshold, SAT, is $250,000 for an ordinary buy and goes higher for contingency, humanitarian, or emergency operations. The Micro Purchase Threshold, MPT, is $10,000 for most supplies and services, but it drops to $2,500 for services subject to the service contract labor standards and $2,000 for construction subject to Davis-Bacon. A quotation is an offer to do business at a stated price. Pay attention to FAR 13.004. A quote is not an offer the government can accept to form a contract. The government issues a purchase order, and that purchase order is the offer. A purchase order, then, is the government's offer to a vendor on stated terms. It becomes a contract when the vendor accepts, either by signing or by performing. And a blanket purchase agreement, a BPA, is a simplified method to fill repetitive needs. Think of it as a charge account, not a contract. The government is not obligated until it actually places a call against the BPA. Picture the simplified acquisition lane as a 4-step ladder. At the bottom, from $0 to $10,000, you have the micro purchase tier, subpart 13.2. The contracting officer needs no competition, no synopsis, no formal solicitation, and the preferred method is the government-wide commercial purchase card. Step up from $10,000 to $250,000, and you are in the heart of subpart 13.3, the SAP zone. The reserve at 13.003 kicks in. Every buy in this band is set aside for small business unless the contracting officer cannot find two competitive small business offers. Step up again from the SAT to 9 million or 15 million for certain contingency and humanitarian acquisitions. And you're in subpart 13.5, simplified procedures for certain commercial items. Above that ceiling, the simplified lane closes and you are back in FAR Part 14 sealed bidding or Part 15 negotiation. The right-hand column gives you the actual numbers, including the reduced micro purchase thresholds for Service Contract Act work and Davis-Bacon construction. Now we tour the 5 subparts you will find inside Part 13. Subpart 13.1, Procedures, is the general rulebook. How to solicit competition, how to evaluate, how to award, and how to document. It applies to every simplified acquisition. Subpart 13.2, Micro Purchase, covers actions at or below the micro purchase threshold. Minimum formality, no competition required, purchase card preferred. Subpart 13.3, Simplified Acquisition Methods, is the toolkit itself. The purchase card, purchase orders, blanket purchase agreements, and the SF-44 Impress style purchase. Subpart 13.4, Fast Payment, defines a narrow set of circumstances where the government pays before it verifies receipt, generally for low-dollar shipments to remote locations. Subpart 13.5, Simplified Procedures for certain commercial products and commercial services, gives contracting officers special authority to use simplified style procedures up to $9 million or $15 million for certain humanitarian and contingency acquisitions, but only when the buy is for commercial items as defined in Part 12. We will spend the next several slides going through each of these subparts in turn. Subpart 13.1, Procedures, is the connective tissue. Whatever method the contracting officer chooses, the process flows through the 5 steps you see on screen. Step 1. Define the need under 13.101 and identify the right source of supply. Step 2. Promote competition under 13.104. The contracting officer should solicit at least 3 sources where practicable and rotate vendors equitably, so the same 1 or 2 firms don't capture every buy. Step 3. Synopsize and post when required. Section 13.105 ties back to FAR Part 5. The synopsis rules in 5.101 and the public posting rules in 5.203. Most SAP actions above $25,000 must be posted to SAM.gov. Step 4. Solicit and evaluate. The RFQ can be written, oral, or even just a phone call for very small buys, and the evaluation must be against the basis announced in the solicitation. Step 5. Award and document. Under 13.106-3, the The contracting officer must determine that the proposed price is fair and reasonable and must document the basis for that determination. This is where most audit findings actually land. Subpart 13.2, the micro-purchase tier, is the simplest band in federal contracting. On the left, we see the dollar lines. The general threshold is $10,000. It drops to $2,500 for services subject to the service contract labor standards and to $2,000 for construction subject to Davis-Bacon. It rises in two important cases, up to $20,000 for domestic emergency declared work and up to $35,000 for purchases outside the United States. There are also higher thresholds for institutions of higher education and certain humanitarian operations. On the right is the operational picture. In the green column, what micro-purchases allow. No competitive quotes, no SAM. Gov synopsis, equitable distribution among suppliers, the purchase card as the preferred payment method, and, importantly, the small business set-aside reserve does not apply. The MPT lane is the one place in Part 13 where a contracting officer can buy from any responsible source. In the red column, what is forbidden, splitting a requirement to stay under the threshold, buying from a non-SAM registered vendor when SAM is required, exceeding your warrant or training, and skipping documentation entirely. Section 13.202 says any obligation made by someone without authority is unenforceable against the government, so the vendor eats the cost. Subpart 13.3, Simplified Acquisition Methods, is the contracting officer's actual toolkit. There are 4 tools. The government-wide commercial purchase card at 13.301, is the default for micro-purchases. It is fast, electronic, and has the lowest overhead per dollar. The purchase order at 13.302, is the bread and butter SAP method between the MPT and the SAT. Remember the legal mechanics? The government issues the PO, and the PO is the offer. The vendor accepts by performing or signing. The blanket purchase agreement at 13.303, is the right tool for repetitive needs. Think office supplies for a particular field office or recurring janitorial calls. The BPA itself does not obligate funds, only individual calls against it do. And the standard Form 44 at 13.306, is the one-page, over-the-counter purchase tool used for on-the-spot, on-site cash-style buys generally limited to micro-purchase amounts. Most small businesses will rarely see this one, but you should know it exists. The first method is the government-wide commercial purchase card. Section 13.301 is short, but its operational impact is huge. The default per transaction limit is $10,000, the same as the micro-purchase threshold. Some agencies have higher card limits for designated cardholders, but for most cardholders, $10,000 is the line. From a vendor's perspective, 3 things matter. 1, you must accept Visa or MasterCard, and Level 3 card data, which captures line item detail, helps the cardholder reconcile and shortens your time to payment. 2, the vendor name on the card processor's record has to match your SAM registration. Mismatches trigger flags. 3, you must provide an itemized receipt. The cardholder needs an audit-grade record. On the right is the typical buy. The cardholder identifies a need, picks any responsible source, pays at point of sale, reconciles the charge in the agency's P-card system, and closes the buy. There is no purchase order, no DD2 or 50 receiving report. The whole cycle can take less than 10 minutes. The second method, purchase orders, is where most vendors live. On the left, we see the legal mechanics. POS are generally issued on a fixed price basis. The vendor accepts by signing or by beginning performance, and once accepted, the PO is a contract. Unpriced POS are permitted, but only when the price cannot be set at award, and they require a not-to-exceed ceiling. Modifications are bilateral, executed on an SF-30 or a new SF-1449. The order can be withdrawn before acceptance. After acceptance, termination follows the rules at 13.302-4. The clauses you must include are listed in 13.302-5, and they differ depending on whether the buy is commercial. On the right are the forms you will actually see. The SF-1449 is the form for commercial buys under Subpart 13.5 or Part 12. DoD agencies use the DD-1155 for non-commercial. Civilian agencies use the OF-347. The OF-336 is a continuation sheet you'll see attached to any of these. If you are receiving a PO and the form looks unfamiliar, those 4 codes will tell you what kind of buy you are in. The third method is the blanket purchase agreement, or BPA. The single most important thing to understand, a BPA is a charge account, not a contract. Look at the diagram on the left. The contracting officer establishes a master BPA that lists pricing terms, the period of performance, the authorized callers, and the not-to-exceed limit. The master itself does not obligate any money. Then, throughout the period, the agency places individual call orders against the BPA. Each call obligates funds for that specific delivery. If the agency never places a call, you never get paid, even if the BPA was in place all year. On the right, the key rules under Section 13.303. The contracting officer should establish multiple BPAs to keep the competition healthy. The master document must specify the items, the pricing basis, the period, the authorized callers, and the not-to-exceed amount. Each call has to be competed informally before it is placed. The BPA is reviewed at least annually, and it ends either when no further requirements are anticipated or when the period closes. Critical footnote: a BPA under FAR 13.303 is not the same as a BPA under FAR 8.405-3 placed against a federal supply schedule. The two have different rules and different limits. Don't conflate them. Two more topics on this slide. On the left, the SF-44. The standard Form 44 is a pocket-sized 3-part form that combines the order, the invoice, and the voucher in one document. It is used for on-the-spot, over-the-counter cash purchases, generally below the micro-purchase threshold. Common uses are field operations, disaster response, refueling, and emergency repairs of vessels or aircraft, and any case where an authorized individual buys at a vendor counter and the agency's electronic purchase systems aren't available. On the right, Subpart 13.4, Fast Payment. The name says it all. The government pays before it has verified that the supplies were received. Because that is risky, all 4 conditions in FAR 13.402 must be met. First, the individual buy has to be at or below an agency set per shipment ceiling. Second, title to the supplies must pass either upon delivery to a carrier, FOB origin, or upon delivery to a government activity. Third, the vendor has to agree to replace, repair, or correct supplies not received in good condition. And fourth, payment is based on the seller's invoice, and the order has to include clause 52.213-1, the fast payment clause. If any one of those 4 boxes is unchecked, the contracting officer cannot use Subpart 13.4. Section 3. Subpart 13.5, Simplified Procedures for certain commercial items. This subpart is the special authority that lets contracting officers use Part 13 procedures well above the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, but only for commercial products and services as defined in FAR Part 12. It is the bridge between the streamlined SAP world and the heavyweight Part 14 and 15 procurements. Understanding when 13.5 applies and when it doesn't can be the difference between winning a multi-million-dollar buy in weeks instead of months. Subpart 13.5, Simplified Procedures for certain commercial items, gives the contracting officer a special hammer. On the left, 3 boxes must be checked. First, the buy must be for commercial items only, products or services that meet the FAR 2.101 definition. Second, the aggregate value, including options, must be at or below $9 million or $15 million for the contingency, humanitarian, and similar categories listed in 13.500. Third, the contracting officer has to expressly invoke Subpart 13.5 and follow the special documentation requirements at 13.501. On the right is the comparison table. What 13.5 unlocks versus a full Part 14 or Part 15 procurement. The solicitation is on an SF-1449 instead of an SF-33. The synopsis requirement still applies. The minimum response time becomes reasonable in the contracting officer's discretion instead of the typical 30 days. The source selection is streamlined. No formal Part 15 evaluation. The clause set is the commercial item suite of 52.212-1, -3, -4, and -5. And the typical cycle time drops from 4 to 9 months down to about 1 to 2. That speed is why both buyers and savvy small businesses love Subpart 13.5. 3 rules govern competition and award under SAP. First, where practicable, the contracting officer must request quotations from at least 3 sources and must rotate suppliers equitably. The point is to keep the same 1 or 2 firms from capturing every buy. Second, before any award, the contracting officer must determine that the proposed price is fair and reasonable. The standard in 13.106-3, is built around competition first, but if competition is missing, the CO may rely on price lists, catalogs, an independent government estimate, or personal market knowledge. Third, the contracting officer must document the basis. The award file has to capture the competition, the evaluation, and the price determination. This is the single most common audit finding in the SAP space. Bottom of the slide, the small business reserve. Above the micro-purchase threshold and at or below the simplified acquisition threshold, every buy is reserved for small business automatically under 13.003b1. The contracting officer can step outside that reserve only if there is no reasonable expectation of getting competitive offers from at least 2 responsible small businesses. The practical impact for you as a small business owner is enormous. In this band, your competitors are other small businesses, not the giants. Here is the clause cheat sheet. There are 2 clause families you will see on a Part 13 award. First family, the 52.213 series, covers SAP buys that are not commercial. The fast payment clause 52.213-1, the invoice clause 52.213-2, the notice to supplier clause 52.213-3, and the catch-all 52.213-4 terms and conditions clause for simplified acquisitions other than commercial. Second family, the 52.212 series, applies whenever the contracting officer is using Subpart 13.5 or Part 12 for a commercial item. The instructions to offers at 52.212-1, the representations at 52.212-3, those come straight out of your SAM. Gov record, the contract terms at 52.212-4 with its order of precedence rules, and the implementing statute checkbox clause at 52.212-5 with its flow-down requirements. The right column tells you the watch out for each one. If you take only one thing from this slide, read 52.212-4 carefully. The order of precedence in that clause governs how disputes get resolved between your quote, the addenda, and the standard terms. Let's make this concrete with a real-world example. A USDA field office cardholder needs 10 seats of commercial cybersecurity training. The total is $4,200. Step 1. The contracting officer confirms the buy is at or below the micro-purchase threshold and the work is not subject to the Service Contract Act or Davis-Bacon, so no reduced threshold applies. Step 2. The cardholder reviews 2 vendors for equitable rotation and picks an ADA firm with prior good performance. Step 3. No SAM. Gov synopsis is required because the buy is below the MPT. The cardholder still verifies that the vendor is active in SAM. Step 4. The cardholder pays with the purchase card directly at the vendor's checkout and pulls down an itemized e-receipt. Step 5. The cardholder reconciles the charge in the agency's P-card system, uploads the receipt, and the approver signs off. Step 6. No purchase order, no SF-1449, no receiving report needed, total elapsed time around 25 minutes. The takeaway, in italics at the bottom, is the punchline for vendors. A SAM active record, a website that takes cards online, and line item invoicing will win you thousands of buys like this every year. Now a larger example. A civilian agency CIO office needs commercial cloud migration services for 12 months. The total estimated value is $1.6 million, well above the simplified acquisition threshold, but well below the $9 million subpart 13.5 ceiling. On the left are the scenario facts, the SF-1449 RFQ format, the 52.212 commercial clause set, and a small business set-aside applied by the contracting officer. On the right is the timing. Day 1 through 3, the contracting officer determines the item is commercial under Part 12, confirms it is under $9 million, invokes Subpart 13.5, and applies the FAR Part 19 small business set-aside. Day 4 through 7, the synopsis is posted on SAM. Gov per FAR 5.203 and the SF-1449 RFQ is released with the 4502.212 clauses attached. Day 8 through 25, the response window. Quotes come in, questions and answers are pushed out as RFQ amendments. Day 26 through 35, streamlined evaluation against the announced factors of price plus technical and past performance. Day 36 through 42, the contracting officer makes the fair and reasonable price determination required by 13.106-3 and documents the award basis under the special documentation rules at 13.501. Day 43 to 45, award is issued, the small business size is verified, and performance begins. Total cycle, about 45 days. A comparable Part 15 buy would have taken 6 to 9 months. The takeaway in italics is the punchline. Subpart 13.5 cuts 60 to 80% of the cycle time, but the commercial clause set still demands a clean SAM record and a disciplined past performance write-up to win. 6 common pitfalls. These are the issues that show up in protests, audits, and lost awards. First, splitting the buy. Breaking a single requirement into pieces to stay under the micro-purchase or simplified acquisition thresholds is explicitly forbidden by FAR 13.003C2. Second, an inactive SAM record. An expired SAM registration disqualifies you from any award above the MPT. There are no exceptions and no waivers. Third, skipping the price determination. Section 13.106-3 requires a documented fair and reasonable finding for every award. Leaving it out is the single most common audit finding. Fourth, ignoring the small business reserve. Awarding non-small business above the MPT and below the SAT without a documented exception is a protest magnet. Fifth, treating a quote as a contract. Per 13.004, a quote is not an offer. The government's purchase order is the offer. The vendor accepts. Vendors who start performance before they have the PO in hand are exposed. Sixth, BPA confusion. Mixing up the FAR 13.303 BPA with the FAR 8.405-3 FSS BPA, they have different rules, different ceilings, and different protest rights. Don't conflate them. Let's bring it home with 5 takeaways. 1. Most federal buys live in this part of the FAR. Over 70% of contract actions ride Part 13. If you are not visible in this lane, you are missing the bulk of federal buying activity. 2. 3 thresholds drive every decision in this part: $10,000 for micropurchase, $250,000 for the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, and $9 million or $15 million for the Subpart 13.5 ceiling. They decide which method, which competition rule, and which clauses. 3. 4 methods are available: the purchase card, the purchase order, the BPA, and the SF-44. Each has a sweet spot, and a good contracting officer matches the method to the value, the urgency, and the repetition of the need. 4. Above the micropurchase threshold and at or below the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, every buy is reserved for small business by default. Plan your pursuits around that band. 5. Compliance is half the win. An active SAM record, documented fair and reasonable pricing evidence, and a clean past performance write-up are what turn quotes into awards under Part 13. That brings us to the call to action. If FAR Part 13 is the lane where most federal buying actually happens, the question for your business is simple: are you set up to win there? Neybor Consulting helps small and emerging federal contractors find Part 13 opportunities, prepare compliant quotes, and stand up the BPAs, the SAM presence, and the pricing evidence that agencies actually want to see. In a working session with us, we'll cover your top 5 Part 13 target agencies and NAICS, run a review of your SAM record and past performance gaps, build a BPA and GPC strategy tailored to your offering, and lay out a 30, 60, 90-day plan to your first Simplified Acquisition Award. Go to Neybor Consulting.com to book your consultation. Thank you for your time today, and we look forward to helping you win on the Simplified Acquisition lane.